This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge & Company. More than 356,000 women are now serving in the United States Armed Forces, and over 2 million women are veterans of earlier service. Still, they're searching for equal treatment, equal opportunity, and an acceptable quality of life. The Service Women's Action Network, established in 2007 to support women veterans, has become a leading human rights organization that with its strong advocacy is changing national policies and improving direct services to the women. Rachel Natelson is the legal director of SWAN and my guest today. Welcome, Rachel. I'm so glad to talk to you.
Thank you.
This has become such a major issue. I mean, I think when SWAN first started, it was like a voice coming, quiet, you know, trying to be fast, loud, but really quiet, not being paid attention to. And it's a very hard issue because now we've got so many women in the forces and they are being deprived, right?
Yes, and I think traditionally the military really wasn't an institution that had to respond to the needs of women. And certainly the Department of Veterans Affairs was the same. It was an institution that was really conceived and organized to respond to the needs of an all-male population.
On a different level, it's almost like colleges that were all men's colleges and then accepted women. I mean, it's always a period of adjustment.
Yeah.
This is more serious.
Yeah, just because in addition to having to respond to people's employment needs, there's, in the military, your employment needs and all of your other needs as a human being are very much intertwined.
Yeah, the whole life becomes involved with it. You know, my husband, who's a very progressive guy, but of a certain age, can never understand why women want to be able to go into combat. And that's the kind of prevalent thing. But there are underlying strong reasons why they want to.
Yeah.
So tell us about them.
Well, to begin with, you know, I think it's just a matter of basic equal opportunity, that there are plenty of things, for example, that I wouldn't want to do as an individual, but you wouldn't want women categorically to be deprived of the opportunity to do them. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily want to be a surgeon, but I wouldn't want to say that no women could be surgeons. With combat, it's the same thing. There are women who are more than qualified to do it, who are more qualified than men to do it, you know, who feel that it's their calling or something that they want to do, and as such, if they're qualified to do it, they should be able to. And that's the analysis that really governs every other type of employment in this country. If you were going to bar a particular category from participating in the opportunities, you have to have a reason for it that is related to the responsibilities of the job.
But when I said underlining, it also means that there are promotions and lines of advancement that are affected by the ruling of being in combat.
And I think that because traditionally and under the letter of the law still, women were not allowed to access combat positions, there's a sense, for example, when women get out of the military and are applying for different types of benefits, that they haven't performed the same feats that their male counterparts have. And as a result of that, they might be barred from certain rewards, certain opportunities for promotion, certain distinctions. And what's especially unfair is that they're actually doing all of these things on the ground. They're just not being recognized for it formally.
They are up in combat.
Yeah.
And they've even been troops of women. What did they call them?
Lioness troops.
The lioness groups that would go into a community to stabilize.
Right,
because they thought women are better than men doing it.
Right, or to perform tasks that men wouldn't be able to do, like engage with women in the native population.
Right. But now, so this brings us to another important topic about, and I'm trying to weave them together, and it's a little difficult, but sexual harassment and assault.
Right.
A major issue.
Yeah. And for us, it's not terribly hard to connect them, just because if you're creating distinctions between what men can do and the way men are recognized and the way women are recognized, in a way you're marginalizing women and you're suggesting that they're not of the same value that men are in the military. And I think that does translate into increased vulnerability to harassment or to poor treatment. And so we see a lot of that with our clients.
But there is a lot of this going on.
Yes.
Are women, when they're attached to a company, I don't know all the distinctions between battalions and companies and stuff, but when they're attached someplace, they have their separate quarters?
No, they engage with men. They're mixed in with their
In the barracks,
male
they're mixed
counterparts.
in? And the same showers and everything? I don't know.
I couldn't say. Not.
Yeah.
I personally didn't serve in the military,
Yeah.
so I couldn't say based on experience. But there is not segregation in the way that women work and live in the military.
And reporting the sexual assault or even the harassment is a very difficult thing. Isn't it?
Yes, there are a lot of barriers to reporting.
This is because the Army is organized in such a way, right?
Yeah.
The lines of responsibility and accountability.
Yes, and there are two issues for us when it comes to redress for sexual harassment and sexual assault. There's the way the criminal justice system works within the military, and then there's also the fact that women in the military are barred from accessing the types of remedies that crime victims outside of the military would be able to access through the civil courts.
So we have two parallel systems going on.
Right.
Was that a hard adjustment for you?
My background
As
is
a
in civil legal services. So, and particularly in violence against women within the context of the civil courts. So I'm always a little bit skeptical of the ability of the criminal justice system to meet the needs of sexual assault and sexual harassment victims. But in the military, the only system and the only types of remedies that people have access to, or really the only judicial system that exists within the military, is the criminal justice system. So a lot of victims there's a lot of symbolic value that victims attach to the way that the military justice system works. And when it doesn't work, I think it's especially galling for them, and they feel especially betrayed because they don't have, unlike people outside of the military, it's not like you can then, if the criminal justice system doesn't work out and the perpetrator in your case isn't convicted or isn't even tried, it's not like you can then go to civil court and pursue a civil case against either the perpetrator or your employer. You're sort of stuck with what the criminal justice system can offer you.
So a woman is sexually assaulted, and there's an equal opportunity person designated for each company or battalion or something?
Right, for usually a base EO
Base,
office.
and also somebody for sexual harassment or assault. Is that the same person?
They're two different reporting processes, depending on whether it's a criminal offense, whether it's sexual assault, or whether it is sort of a civil offense like sexual harassment. So sexual harassment, the way it is in the civilian world, is regarded as an EO issue, equal opportunity, and it's regarded more broadly as a form of sex discrimination. Whereas sexual assault, because it's a criminal act, you would go through a different reporting process that if you elect to inform law enforcement, then the person you report to would get the law enforcement agents involved. Your commander would be involved, because the way that the military approaches criminal conduct is as a matter of good order and discipline.
So you go to the next person over you?
Right. So if, for example, let's say you're the victim of sexual assault, there are a variety of points of entry. You can go right to your commander and tell them, and usually, not always, but usually the commander, it's the same commander of the victim and the perpetrator. Or you can go to the sexual assault response coordinator,
Which is outside the
which is within the military,
Yeah.
but it's a central
sort of outside
office.
the line
Right.
of command.
or you can report to a chaplain, or you can actually report to civilian law enforcement if you want, or you can report to military law enforcement. So there are a bunch of different agents who will receive reports of sexual assault. And depending on with whom you file the report, then it will proceed to the next step. But if you decide that you don't want to file what's called a restricted report, which is that you want to access services, but you don't want to name your perpetrator, and you don't want to, to initiate an investigation against the perpetrator. If you decide that you want to proceed with an unrestricted report, then your command is going to find out about it. And there are a whole bunch of consequences that come of that.
They don't like that to happen.
They don't, because really what they're there to do is to make sure that the mission is accomplished.
And to have a cohesive unit, right?
Right.
That's a very important characteristic.
So if they sense that there's disruption within the unit, that's a problem for them, and they want to deal with it and get it out of the way as quickly and easily as they can. Their main concern, and I'm not saying this in a judgmental way, but they're not there to dispense justice. Mm-hmm. They're not prosecutors, they're not judges, they're not legally trained. It would be like in a civilian workplace going to your boss and telling them that all of a sudden they have to sort of turn themselves into an ad hoc adjudicator and decide what kind of corrective action to take for criminal conduct. And that's not something that commanders are equipped to do or necessarily want to have to do, because it distracts them from the work at hand.
What happens if they say, and bring the two parties together or something and eliminate the charge? Do you have an appeal process?
Well, I mean, it's like the criminal justice system outside of the military. The rights in the criminal justice system attach to the accused, not to the victim. So the victim really isn't a party. The victim is just a witness. So there's not, you don't have, and again, this isn't confined to the military, but when you're a crime victim, you don't really have agency within the criminal justice process, because all you can do is support the case of the prosecutor.
You go to the prosecutor.
Right, and the prosecutor isn't representing the victim, the prosecutor is representing the state or the public at large.
So that's why people resort to the civil court?
Exactly. So for a lot of crime victims, and especially with sex crimes, which are so under-prosecuted, and even when they're prosecuted, it's so hard to gain convictions. A lot of, and this has been the case outside of the military as well, a lot of victims of sex crimes have turned to the civil courts for greater recognition and for empowerment, because unlike with the criminal justice system, if you're bringing a case, if you're a victim and are turning to the civil courts, that's your case. It's not the prosecutor's case. You can decide what types of decisions you want to make. You can decide what type of relief you're going to pursue.
You're in control of your case.
Yeah, you're in control of your case. And that is not an option available to military personnel.
But it is an option to civilian personnel of the military.
Yes. So civilian military personnel can, under the Civil Rights Act, pursue Title VII claims. So they can sue the military for acts of discrimination, and discrimination encompasses sexual harassment and sexual assault.
So if they report a sexual assault, nobody can stop it, and nobody's going to be that angry. I mean, well, people will be angry, but they're outside of that line of command. Right.
So, I mean, the way it works in a civilian workplace is, say, you're having problems, somebody is harassing you at work, it might be your supervisor, it might be a peer, and first you're obligated to try to resolve it internally. You tell your employer. If your employer fails to take corrective action, then your employer becomes liable for any injuries you might suffer. And as a result of that liability, or that potential liability, serves as a deterrent against workplace violence. So I don't think it's an accident that you see elevated rates of this type of conduct in the military, because there just aren't the same institutional deterrents in the military.
And there are many unreported assaults.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's the remedy for this? I mean, is it simply changing regulations? Is it a different system of enforcement? Is it legislative? What's the remedy?
I mean, I think it's always worth pursuing reform on both ends, through the courts and through Congress or other legislative bodies. Unfortunately, until now, the courts have been very deferential to the military. I would say more deferential than they're required to be by statute or by the Constitution, but I think there's a cultural sense that the military knows what it's doing,
Right.
and I think so few people serve in the military that there's a sense that if we're not going to be part of this, if we're not going to make the sacrifice ourselves, we should at least give the military a free pass to do its own job, its own way. But unfortunately, that winds up infringing on a lot of the rights of individual service members, that degree of deference towards the military as an institution.
So is the result most of these women leave the military?
Well, often women will leave, but not voluntarily. So what we see a lot of, and we have a helpline, that's our vehicle for providing direct services as a national helpline. And people call us from around the country and sometimes overseas. And we get calls both from women who are currently serving and from women who are already out. And from women who are currently serving, what we most often hear is that after they make a report, they experience some kind of retaliation. So sometimes that retaliation, because again, their command don't want them to rock the boat. They want to be able to return to focusing on what they're there for. So they don't want, in order to minimize disruption, this is a response to sort of identify the victim or the person who's reported the assault as a problem and try to find a way to get rid of the problem. So one way to do it, for example, is by requiring that that person leave the military. And sometimes the victim does want to leave the military. Sometimes she doesn't want to leave. But the way that these separations are processed is in a way that prevents the victim from being able to access benefits through the VA when she gets out of the military.
I was going to say, so they're designated, what is it, what?
So, I mean, there are different ways that you could be discharged from the military, but often what we'll see is instead of being processed out medically, where there's an acknowledgement that that as a result of a sexual assault you have, say, PTSD or something like that, and that would qualify you automatically for a certain level of benefits from the VA. Instead of taking that path, a commander will either charge the victim with some kind of misconduct. They'll say, oh, well, you were drinking at the time, you were engaging in underage drinking at the time of the offense, or you were the perpetrator was married, so you've allowed him commit adultery or facilitated an adulterous relationship or something like that, or the victim is married. And so sometimes the victim will be charged with misconduct. Other times the victim will be effectively branded as having some kind of behavioral problem that doesn't rise to the level of a disability. So a while ago, this was a few years ago, the military was discharging a lot of victims with personality disorder instead of with PTSD. And personality disorder meant that they had a pre-existing mental health condition that the military wasn't responsible for because they had it before they ever entered the military. That got a certain amount of public attention, and the military over the past few years has stopped using those discharges, but instead they've replaced those discharges with adjustment disorder discharges. And those are, while adjustment disorders are different from personality disorders, the military uses the terms interchangeably because
if you can't adjust to being raped,
right,
keep quiet about it.
So it's adjustment disorder is not a pre-existing condition, but it's not PTSD. So it's considered a lesser response, or a response to sort of a ordinary life stressor like divorce, death in the family, something like that, as opposed to a response to a very severe or life-threatening stressor like which would generate PTSD. So the outcome is the same, which is that you don't get to the point, the military isn't recognizing that you actually have a medical problem that they're responsible for, and instead are saying either the problem existed before you got into the military, or now they're saying, well, it's not that big a problem, it's really more of a behavioral problem on your part, but it's not a real disability. So, and that winds up compromising access to benefits later on.
So you can't get psychological assistance, you can't get any of it then?
You can't get, primarily you can't get disability compensation from the VA. And for a lot of women who get out of the military and are really destabilized and they're not necessarily in a position to access and maintain employment.
So that means they don't get any money.
Right.
So then they become homeless.
Exactly.
And that begins the spiral down. Let's talk now about the VA, because that's another place that reflects the difference, right? Are the services changing?
I think that there's certainly a recognition within, because the VA is divided into sort of two sections, the section that delivers health care and then the section that delivers benefits. And so the section that delivers health care, I think, is acknowledging now that they have a lot of work to do in terms of catching up with the needs presented by women veterans. And it's a big undertaking. There's a lot that they still have to do in terms of just providing women doctors, because a lot of sexual assault victims feel more comfortable engaging with women physicians or women providers.
Veterans. Yeah.
And just sort of turning the VA facilities into places that are not hostile to women, like respecting privacy needs, respecting the needs of women who have children, that sort of thing. So I think that there's some slow movement when it comes to VA health services to acknowledge that women have special needs that need to be met. With the part of the VA that is in charge of sort of distributing benefits, I think there's a lot less recognition that women have special needs, or that their claims for disability compensation involve issues that need to be addressed more seriously. So, for example, a big issue of sort of a big legislative and advocacy campaign of ours has to do with the burden of proof for people who are trying to access disability compensation. So if you want to access compensation for the VA, you have to prove to the VA that you're disabled and that you served in the military, and then you also have to prove by documentary evidence that there's a direct connection between your disability and your time in the service. Now, for most people with PTSD, the VA has relaxed those requirements and has said, if you can prove that you have PTSD, so there's a VA provider has diagnosed you with PTSD, and you can prove that you've served under certain circumstances, that you served, say, in a combat arena, that you were deployed, something like that, then we'll give you the benefit of the doubt as to those two things being connected. We'll presume that your PTSD stems from your time in service. Now, unfortunately, with military sexual trauma, claimants are not given that benefit of the doubt. So if you served in the military and you have PTSD, and the stressor that led to that PTSD is sexual assault or sexual harassment, you still have to go through that added step of assembling, through documentary evidence, proof that the two are connected, that the reason why you have PTSD is because you suffered this incident in the military. And what makes it really hard is that not everybody reports. The Department of Defense acknowledges that probably 85% or more of victims are not going to report at all. So that type of evidence often doesn't exist.
And then the evidence is only kept for 2 years.
Traditionally, there were also problems with record retention, and that's something that we've been addressing through legislation recently, but until very recently, you would see equal opportunity complaints, which are the type of complaints that would reflect sexual harassment or discrimination. Those would be kept for 2 years.
So how are you trying to change this?
So the main legislative vehicle for addressing issues involving military personnel is the National Defense Authorization Act. And and it's passed every December. So it was just passed last month for this coming year. And primarily it serves as a vehicle for, authorizing funding for the military, but it also creates substantive rights and remedies. So last year, there was a provision that require the military to retain records of unrestricted sexual assault reports for 50 years instead of what had traditionally been the norm, which was 5 years. And this year they extended that same provision to restricted reports, which are the ones that don't give rise to criminal charges.
So have they done anything about the people who make these decisions?
Who make in terms of the VA benefits?
Yeah.
I mean, according to the VA, they're trying to be more aggressive about training their claims processors to identify sort of what they call secondary markers of sexual assault. So even if you don't have, say, an official report of sexual assault in your record, VA claims processors are authorized to make certain deductions based on behavioral cues, like did somebody's job performance suddenly start declining? Did they suddenly need mental health counseling? Did they suddenly access services like pregnancy tests or something like that? But the list that the VA provides in regulations isn't exhaustive, and so it's not necessarily going to be the case that everybody who is a victim of sexual assault is going to decline in their job performance. For some people it's the reverse, where in order not to think about it, they'll throw themselves into their work. So it's, the more discretion you give the claims processors, the more problematic it is for claimants, just because the default position of the VA claims processors is, these people are out to scam us, let's see what we can do to prevent them from, from robbing the public fisc.
We're coming to almost the end of our program, and there are two things. One is, with more women in the Congress, do you expect to have more support for some of these changes? I hope so.
I hope so too, with more women and also with more veterans.
Yes, that's right.
Because, and sometimes we see an intersection of the two, because I think that for a lot of people who've served in the military, this is really a disgrace and an affront to an institution that they care about.
And it's old-fashioned. It hasn't brought itself up to the consciousness and awareness that we have today. What about the colleges, or like the Lackland the congressional hearing that's going to happen about the Air Force Academy? Are they, the Academy, West Point, Annapolis, are they under the same rules?
Well, what's happening in Lackland is actually has to do with people who are actually in the military but are in boot camp. So it's as soon as they get into the military. And it is indeed a training environment. So because this is the first thing that they do when they get into the military is they're being trained on how to be soldiers, how to be airmen, how to be sailors. So it is it's a training environment, but it's not entirely the same as, say, being in an educational institution.
So we've come to the end, and we haven't begun to talk about a lot of things, so I hope you'll come back again. But this has been so interesting and so relevant. I wanted also to talk about the effects of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but we'll do that another time.
Okay. Well, we're always glad to come back.
Thank you, Rachel. Is there any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore? Please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.